Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I know people are going to be coming in as we start, and we'll just give them access. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Teaching Students of Color in STEM webinar. My name is Franklin Garrett. I'm the director of the Student Success Center in the Division of Physical Sciences at UCSD. I will be moderating the first half of today's event. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I would like to go over a few things. First, if you haven't already done so, please visit Slido.com, www.slido.com, or download the app. Once you get to that website, you're going to want to enter the code H756, or you can scan the QR code on the screen behind me. You will have an opportunity to send questions for the Q&A portion of the webinar. To help familiarize yourself with Slido, what we're going to do is we're going to start out with a polling question. So I'm asking all the participants to go to Slido now, and you're going to answer the polling question that we have set up for you. Again, the website for Slido is www.slido.com, SLIDO.com, and then the code there is H756. While you are doing that, I want to go over a few reminders for the webinar in order for it to run smoothly. While on Slido, you can actually see other people's questions on the screen. The questions that resonates most with you, what you're going to want to do is like those questions. Those questions will be made popular and go to the top of the screen. It's important to do this because this helps us select the questions that we're going to ask during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have a specific question for one of our panelists, what we're going to ask you to do is address them by their first name followed by your question. Then that way we can ask during the Q&A session. It's important to know that, unfortunately, we aren't going to have time to go over all the questions that's asked today. However, we've asked our panelists to provide written responses to some of the questions that we're not going to be able to cover today. And those questions will be posted on our website. So audience, another thing to keep in mind, you're going to want to make sure that you're on mute and that your video is off. This webinar is going to be available online at the Student Success Center website. That is center.ucsd.edu. And lastly, just a little bit more logistics. When you're watching the presentation, you have a couple of options. You can put the presentation in speaker view or gallery view. If you choose speaker view, you'll be able to only see the person talking at that moment. If you choose gallery view, you'll be able to see the speaker in the full panel talking. So again, for those of you who are still logging in, what we've asked for our participants to do is to go over to slido.com, and you're going to enter the code H756, and you're going to answer that polling question that we have set up for you. So Tina, can you go ahead and share your screen and we can see what responses we have so far? Okay, these are still coming in, but so far we have 41% graduate students and 14% undergrad. 37% faculty, that's nice to see. So it looks like we're holding pretty steady there. 40% graduate. Okay. Okay, so it looks like we're around 12% undergrad, 39% graduate, 3% alumni, 38% faculty, and 9% staff. It's a good distribution for the topic that we have today. So again, thank you for joining this event. If you are just logging in, I want to just mention one last time that to go ahead and scan the QR code behind me so you can put your question in for our QR portion of the session. So I want to thank our panelists for being here today and sharing your time, your wisdom, and your knowledge with our fellow Tridents. I'm going to do a very brief introduction of each of our panelists, and then one of the questions is going to be for them to introduce themselves in a little bit more detail. But the first person I want to introduce is Dr. Savakula. He is a distinguished leader in physics in the physics department. He received his PhD in physics from Harvard University. Dr. Stallings is an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. He received his PhD in chemistry from the University of Alabama. Dr. Bredick is associate professor of statistics in the Department of Mathematics. She received her PhD in statistics from Princeton University. Dr. Demetrio is a professor of mathematics at UCSD. She received her PhD in applied math from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Pascal is an assistant professor of nanoengineering and chemical engineering. He received his PhD from the California Institute of Technology in 2010. So we don't want to waste too much time. We want to jump right into our exciting topic today. So the first question, I actually want to throw this out to Dr. Savakula. The first question is, please provide a brief overview of your educational, professional, and research background and what you're doing currently in your role.
Okay, thanks, Franklin. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
It's Franklin Tinas, and thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. As you mentioned, I'm a professor of physics here at UCSD. I got my bachelor's degree at Caltech and my PhD at Harvard. I've been at 3 institutions of higher education. I was a assistant professor, associate and full professor at Boston University until 2003. I was at Michigan State from 2003 to 2016, or 2000, yeah. And I was also the associate dean for faculty development at our College of Natural Science, where I was involved in STEM education reform projects, and I was also the dean of undergraduate studies. And then since 2018, I've been here at UCSD. And my research interests are in high energy theoretical physics.
Thank you for that. Dr. Stalling?
First and foremost, thank you for the invitation. Really stoked to be here and have this conversation. It's very timely. So as you said before, I received my PhD from the University of Alabama. My undergraduate was at Georgia Southern University. I taught for multiple years before transitioning from chemical education, actually teaching at university, to science policy. I did so as a function of my experiences as a professor, and I wanted to dive down into the barriers that underrepresented minorities face within the nation within STEM. And so I started working for an organization called Oxide out of Georgia Tech, and our goal was to come up with policies and procedures that change the dynamics in the hiring and retention policies of faculty at top R1 chemistry institutions. That position transitioned into me doing something similar at Johns Hopkins. And after being there for 3 years, I took a position here at UCSD. Brand new to this campus, my first day here at UCSD or at in San Diego was when Costco had the run on toilet paper. So that was my first experience with my local San Diego folks. So it's great to meet all of you. So from that point on campus right now, my scholarship has been focusing on similar stuff to what I did at Oxide. Oxide, I worked with deans and chairs and provosts and upper level administration, but here I actually get to do the work myself. So I'm working with fellow colleagues and faculty members trying to change the climates within our departments and within our classrooms.
Thank you for that. Dr. Bredick?
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the campus. It's great to be here, and thank you for organizing everything. I'm happy to be here. I'm an associate professor of statistics. I technically sit in 2 departments. One is mathematics and one is data science institute. I'm very happy to be here to share my experiences. My research is in high dimensional statistics and machine learning and statistical learning. I'm one of the Leeds fellows on campus, saying hi to some of the other ones that I see here. That's leader in equity, diversity, and leadership. Yeah, so short from my end, that's it.
Thank you. Dr. Demetrio?
Hello, everyone. So I should say that I'm a relatively new addition to UCSD. I've taught at University of Washington in Seattle for 13 years before I joined UCSD last summer, actually. So it's been an eventful year. Let's see, so my own research is in numerical analysis with flavorings of random matrices, random graph theory, network theory, sometimes wading into data science. And I hope to do more of that now because I'm here at UCSD. Let's see, so I've got my PhD at MIT. I did a postdoc at UC Berkeley, and then I worked for University of Washington for a long time. So basically after my PhD, I've spent a lot of time in large public institutions. And coming here to UCSD, I have gotten involved, recruited, volunteered for EDI work, so equity, diversity, inclusion, and I'm learning a lot every day. I have nowhere near the credentials that the other panelists have, but I'm doing my best to learn. So I hope that I can share some of my experiences and learn a lot from yours.
Thank you. Dr. Pascal?
Hello, everyone, and first off, thanks for the invitation. It was great to receive it, and it's great to be on this panel. So my name is Todd Pascal. As was said before, I got my PhD from Caltech. After that, I went overseas. I kind of wanted a slightly different experience, and so I did 2 years postdoc in Korea at KAIST. And then came back to the US, and then I was sort of like a bridge year postdoc at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and then I became a staff scientist there. And in 2017, December of 2017, I started at UCSD. So my research primarily is sort of materials physics, right at the intersection of spectroscopy and thermodynamics. And material science. I'm a faculty member of the material science department and of the Data Science Institute as well. So we primarily use computer simulations to look at nanoscale materials and try to understand how those materials work, specifically for energy applications, batteries, capacitors, and so forth. And also these days, we're starting to get into solar cells and sort of water desal. So we have a kind of quirky little group of computer nerds who just like doing simulations. As far as equity and diversity, I'm part of the sort of the faculty advisor for the Idea Center here on campus in the Jacobs School of Engineering. But I'm looking forward to hearing everyone else's experiences about equity and diversity and maybe contributing to that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all for your introduction. So what we'll do is we'll keep the same order for our panel discussion. So the first one is going to be, question is going to be for Dr. Savakula. And that question is, how does this student/faculty relationship contribute to success for students of color?
So I think that the faculty-student interaction is absolutely critical for all students, not just students of color, but it's particularly important. I think the way I would summarize it, and I'll keep it short so that others can contribute as well, I'd say regardless of your teaching subject or your style, students need and want to know that their instructors care about them, that they care about their learning, and that they are invested in their students. I think that it makes a tremendous difference. And I think it's especially the case for our students of color who have perhaps not always had as supportive faculty and instructors in the past.
Thank you. Dr. Stalin?
I like to apologize ahead of time because I know I'm long-winded. So from my perspective, each professor creates a learning atmosphere that is dependent upon the way that they interact with the classroom. So there's a great study that was done a couple years ago by Mary Murphy at IU, which looked at the growth mindset of a person versus the fixed mindset of a person with respect to faculty members in STEM. And when they say growth mindset, what they're saying is that what you walk into with the classroom as a student doesn't actually, determine your capabilities within that particular classroom. you're able to grow, you're able to learn, you're able to move forward, you're able to achieve. A fixed mindset essentially says that you have innate abilities and either you get it or you don't. And so they essentially allow professors to self-identify as having one of these particular mindsets. And what they found out was that students that came from underrepresented backgrounds performed substantially less, achieved substantially less inside classrooms where faculty members have fixed mindsets. So I guess I would say that the way that a professor walks into a classroom, the way a professor interacts with the students is going to determine so much. And I think we have this misinterpretation that if you have a growth mindset, that means that you're only helping minority students. But as it turns out, and all these policies that help minority students, they also end up helping every other student as well. So for students that were in classrooms with professors with growth mindsets, not only did the underrepresented minority students do better, so did every other student. And so the way that we approach this has an immense effect. Now, this is the last thing I'll say, then I'll leave it alone. There's a perception that because generationally, a transition is happening with faculty members, and that transition should correlate to more faculty members having a growth mindset, right? But all the data shows that's not true. Also, the statement of if you have more minority or more female faculty members, you should have more growth mindset faculty members. That sentiment is not exactly true either. So what it says is that we need to actually think about the way we approach this, and all faculty members need to, evaluate themselves and the way that they present in the classrooms and ask themselves the question, are they limiting their students by the expectations that they're putting in front of them or the lack of expectations?
Thank you. Dr. Braddock?
Okay. It's hard to add on to that. I completely agree with everything that we've heard. I think that specifically for students of color, interactions with faculty is vital for their ability to even navigate the educational system, not just to succeed in a particular class environment, but broadly speaking, to navigate their career after their studies at UCSD, say, and to understand maybe discipline-specific norms. I'm thinking about research opportunities that they can get through faculty interactions they wouldn't necessarily get otherwise in a single classroom environment. So I do want to connect with, on another note, to growth mindset. This is particularly difficult to navigate in mathematics. I can speak to my experiences. I was often told that as a woman, I cannot do as good as men in mathematics. Well, I think I'm doing okay. So, I think the students need to hear the faculty have experienced that we all feel it, maybe less, maybe we navigate every day through it. So they would not get that opinions and interactions without actually communicating with the faculty. So personal touches, I think, are especially important. Adhering to our humanity, we're all human beings with our desires, and strive and teach our students to learn to seek the truth, the scientific truth, the justice truth, whatever is their inspiration is particularly important at the university level, and the students need to hear that they can succeed, and that's really important.
Thank you. Dr. Demetrio?
So like Yelena said, it's hard to add too much on top of everything else that has been said, but I'll try and maybe add at the margins, which are especially in math, as Dr. Bradich said, there's this very clear fixed mindset. You either get it or you don't, and it's something that we really have to work to combat, because math being good at math is acquiring a skill set, really, and putting in the effort and the work that needs to be done to understand it and to acquire it, just like everything else. And in my opinion, especially given that our introductory classes are so large and as such severely limit the possibility of interaction, one-on-one interaction with the student on the faculty part. I mean, you can do a lot of things to mitigate that, and I'm not going to get into it. But the fact remains that you cannot teach a class of 300 students in the same way that you would teach a class of 30 students. But I feel like one important thing that the instructor can do is encourage people to work together. And reward them for working together, and make it clear that collaboration rather than competition is the aim, and that they all grow better and they learn better when they help each other. So those are my
Thank you. Dr. Pascal?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I have the great misfortune of having to go last with these things, and I have absolutely nothing to add to this particular discussion. I think, okay, well, maybe I can add this. In my interactions with students, in particular students of color in the Jacobs School, I have found, generally speaking, that while these students are equally as capable as their peers, there seemed to be this underlying idea in their heads anyway, that in terms of doing computational science, which is what I do, that they are ill-equipped to perform that sort of research. And it's absolutely not true. And so part of what I have tried to do, endeavored to do, is to just have, informal, formal, just have conversations with them and talk a little bit about my story and a little bit about why I'm here. And just communicate to them that my story is not unique, and it could be their story if they were so inclined. And if they're not, then, that's not as awesome. But if they are, then, to certainly push them forward and to let them know that, here at UCSD, and I say this coming from other institutions, we do care about them, each and every one of them, color or not, and that we think, they wouldn't be here unless we thought that they were capable, and just communicate that to them. So that's all I have.
Thank you. This next, so this webinar was inspired by our Sloan Scholars and other programs on campus educating PhD students to go into academia. So this question can really be beneficial for them specifically. And the question is, how can faculty best support the teaching and learning enterprise of students of color?
So I guess to go first, to build on what Dr. Stallings and the other panelists have said, there's really a substantial literature that shows that taking a student-centered approach to teaching in the way that you teach, to perhaps including active and cooperative learning, to build on the theme of working together that was mentioned in the last question, that those methods of teaching do better, as Dr. Stallings said, for all students, but they do particularly better that students of color, students who are underrepresented in the classroom, in my case for women in physics, that those students do even gain disproportionately from those kinds of teaching techniques, as opposed to the very standard, traditional, formal lecture, which can seem very off-putting and difficult to students. I'm going to leave others for other things for my other panelists to say, but so let me stop there for now.
Dr. Stalling?
I'll do a better job this time. I'm not rambling so long. We need to be able to recognize that the rate at which a student learns material is not as important as what they have in their mind when they walk out of the classroom. And we need to build our courses that way. Oftentimes what happens is that students have a stronger foundation. And because of that foundation, they're able to get things initially faster in your class. So the thing is, if you have a student who has a foundation that's not as strong and they're competing against that student, they feel like they're failing as a function of the comparison. But at the end of the day, Our goal as professors should be to let those students know that they still have the opportunity to attain this knowledge before they walk out the class. And their grades should be corresponding to what they have when they walk out.
Thank you. Dr. Bredett?
Okay, so I agree with everything said. I do want to not only talk about graduate students, but also touch a little bit about undergraduate students. I think active classroom and student-centered learning is a must. There are a few ways that I could specifically talk about. One can achieve that. Although we have to acknowledge that depending on the topic, it's easier or harder to do that. But I have designed a project-based learning course where the students input as to how they see to allow the students to have self-expression and to design their own learning goals and to adapt the curriculum to that. So in today's time, I think it's really important to give the students the voice that they feel that they're heard and to adapt the curriculum in that way. That's doable with certain amount of extra effort. Then another approach is to perhaps include historical, cultural examples in the curriculum. That's often forgotten, I feel, but that can be, I think that's doable for a broader set of topics. And I think to allow students or to develop their self-affirmation in a course is particularly relevant. That can be done through surveys or in in-class writing assignments. And to connect a little bit to Professor Dimitriou's discussion last time, I think having peer group support is very, very important. So especially perhaps at the undergraduate level. So if the student is surrounded by peers that are similarly centered with similar goals and studying together to achieve those goals, and they're surrounded in a class where their voices are being heard, that's the best outcome that we could hope for everybody. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Dimitriou?
So I know that this question was asked having in mind this idea of moving on to graduate studies, but one thing that I've noticed is that attrition tends to happen earlier than that. So students come in and they get into these large undergraduate classes, and maybe they get a little lost. Maybe as Professor Stallings mentioned, they don't start from the same background, so it's a little bit harder for them to catch up. They get some negative messaging. They decide that they're not good enough. And the problem with feeling or deciding in your mind that you're not good enough is that it's very hard afterwards to explain to them that yes, they are. So it feels to me like the problem has to start being addressed at the level of large undergraduate introductory classes. And of course, by the time you get to upper division classes, and there are other things that you have to make sure that students of color are told that may not be immediate, like the fact that it's important to start thinking about doing a little bit of research, that there are research opportunities, that there are ways of putting together projects that are maybe as part of a course or outside of a course, independent studies, groups of like-minded students working on the same things. So if you would like to explore the possibility of going to grad school, then there are lots of things that you can do, but you need a lot of guidance. And that's what the faculty have to be willing to be aware of the fact that they have to provide and to be willing to provide, especially since we have so many students. So the math department has a lot of majors. I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but they're on the order of 2,000. So it becomes important that we seek out students to let them know of the opportunities.
Thank you. Dr. Pascal?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think so my answer will be sort of twofold. I agree wholeheartedly that while this question is about undergrads going to graduate school, we certainly as professors and as an institution need to ensure that we are engaging the students of minority students, students of color, women, in the research enterprise way before they even start thinking about going to graduate school, which might be junior year or thereabout. And so to that end, I want to maybe highlight a couple programs in the Jacobs School that I found that I subsequently signed on to because I thought that they were fantastic. And the first one is called the Summer Freshman Institute, where the summer before they join UCSD, we get all of these students to come in and work with UCSD professors, have sort of engineering classes so that if they are somewhat behind, let's say, compared to their peers, that they can catch up within that very first summer. And that has proven to be very, very successful in sort of getting our students of color up to speed. And then the second one is sort of these apprenticeships that that we have throughout the year and usually from the sophomore year, where there is a focus on placing students into the labs of professors who are doing research. And that we found has been, again, tremendously useful. And in fact, there are a few undergrad students who did programs with me, and I am desperately trying to keep them on for graduate school here. And because they're fantastic, and just given the chance to catch up, given the chance to engage in research, they show themselves as capable as anyone else. And I think part of, and working with these students, part of what I try to communicate with them is to demystify this idea that science and STEM can only be performed by people who are geniuses. I mean, I certainly am not one of those people. But, I think I'm doing okay. And so to communicate to them that there is a place for them here, each and every one of them, and we value them. We need, we have extremely difficult challenges as a species. So I'll come off the Sermon of the Mount in a moment, but we have really, really big challenges, and we kind of just need everyone to participate, and we need our students of color to participate, particularly so that we can solve some of these problems.
Thank you all for your insightful panel discussion. This next portion of our webinar, we're going to be asking the panelists questions that were gathered from the attendees. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Sanai Kota, my colleague from Graduate Division. She will be monitoring the Q&A portion of the event.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be asking a series of questions, and feel free to jump in. There's no particular order. If you feel like you have the best answer or somewhat of an answer, feel free to chime in. Not everybody has to answer. So one of the first questions that I think got a popular vote was, as an instructor, when I address EDI with undergraduate students, should I directly mention the Black Lives movement and current events, or just discuss EDI in broader terms?
Okay, I'll go ahead and jump on that one. Absolutely. We can't ignore the elephant in the room, right? We have to be able to discuss exactly what's going on and how it's applicable to the experience that our students are actually having on campus. It's really important that we have authenticity. And I think that when we ignore a certain portion of the conversation, then it makes people not have as much faith in the words that are coming out of our mouth. And so, absolutely. Now, in doing so, you have to make sure that that you approach it in a way that doesn't damage the way that the particular classroom sees you. And I'll say that because I realized that this last spring, my first quarter here, when a lot of people gave the no-fault finals. And that no-fault final was a function in a lot of ways of a lot of external pressure from students. But the thing that kind of got me was that not every single student was having the same experience, but we were given the same brush and given the same output for every single student. And the reason why was because you didn't want to be the professor who told the classroom no, because then maybe that means that you don't support Black Lives Matter. Maybe that means that some students may think you're racist. And that fear and living in that fear made people make decisions that didn't correlate to the way that they wanted their educational experience for the students to be. And I think that we need to make sure that as a faculty community, when we make these large decisions, that we have each other's back and that we have a true conversation so that we can have an outcome that correlates to something that's effective and real versus something that's paintbrushed to make us feel better.
I'll add something if I may. So I completely agree. I think the university should be developing Socrates process where we discuss, we deliberate, and we develop, civic friendships and seek the truth. And that means we all live in today's world. So we cannot ignore what's happening around us just because that is not the reality. It is happening and it is affecting the students and us. But having a discussion rather than statements colored one way or another is the right way to go. So the answer, in my opinion, the answer is just briefly brushing it off or mentioning is perhaps maybe not enough, but you want to give the students the voices because students also feel there's heterogeneity in their experiences with all of this, right? So having the freedom to discuss while respecting each other and loving each other despite the differences, right? Is really important. Yeah.
So if I can jump in briefly to echo what both Dr. Stallings and British have said, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you've ignored your students and you're not paying attention to them as whole human beings in the first half of the quarter, if something happens halfway through the quarter and then you suddenly want to address, it's going to be much, much harder than if you start from the beginning and you're teaching policies, practices, and your interaction in the classroom demonstrate that. So to Dr. Stallings' point, for example, a number of students wrote me at the end of spring quarter asking if they could have a no-fault final because of the protests and other things that were going on. And I explained to them that because of our course policies and the ways that things are going, I felt, we had already sort of incorporated the ability for students to adjust and plan how they wanted to spend their time. And I didn't think the no-fault final was a one-size-fits-all kind of solution that was appropriate. And the students were fine with that. I think we, sometimes as faculty, we feel we can't trust our students to be adults and to be able to deal with things in an appropriate manner. And if we treat them, if we treat them respectfully and we treat them, and when we give them that respect, I think it's returned.
Thank you. Those were great answers. So my next question comes from graduate students. In terms of finding allyship, they want to know, how do you motivate faculty to engage in conversations about social justice and race as it relates to STEM? And thinking about departments and faculty who don't really want to engage in these conversations.
Okay, I'll jump again. So I think the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that not everyone cares. And if we're trying to make a person have the same emotion that you have about a situation, that's a losing battle every single time. And so instead of trying to get faculty members to care about the same thing you care about, let's care about the outcome. If the goal is to do great research, if the goal is to get great funding, what's coming in our pipeline as far as the demographics of our students in the next 10, 15 years? So we see the demographics changing. So the question is, as a faculty member, have you adjusted your lab, your principles, your policies, your practices to put those new students in the next 10 years in a better position to be successful inside your particular lab? Can you compete with your rival faculty member at another university who's doing this? You know, who's going to get that top student, you or the other professor? And so when you make this about the competition of science, in which we all exist in this particular realm, you make it, you put it into a language that every single scientist can actually understand. Now, don't get me wrong, there's tons of scientists that actually empathize, understand, and are drinking the Kool-Aid and are actually trying to change the world and make it a better place when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. But if we only go after conversations with respect to emotion, we're always going to fail. And so we have to figure out a way to make it part of our bottom line. And part of making it part of our bottom line is some of the things that UCSD has done with their recruitment policies. And every single person that I've seen that's been recruited at UCSD in the chemistry department, chemistry and biochemistry, they've come in and they have to give diversity statements as part of their package. And that's because the department cares about the way that EDI is in the climate within the department. So if you make that part of your hiring practice, then you get individuals who care about that. And when we have our tenure and promotion process, if you make that part of the tenure and promotion process, where it's part of the bottom line, but not just a throwaway section, a section that is actually something that matters, then faculty members will have more action as a function of it.
Maybe I'll try again. Also, I agree with what Dr. Stallings has said. I do want to try to address, I think, the emotional content of that question. I do appreciate that, especially at times like last spring, where we had both the coronavirus pandemic going on and we had the national issues and having to do with race and social justice. And looking forward, it's not going to get any better in the fall. We have a national election. Probably Prop 209 will be on the ballot. The pandemic is not yet over. You know, we all of us are going to be going through, I think, difficult emotional times. But I think my response to the question would be, you know, think about your own family. You're not going to get the same emotional support and response from your own family or all of your own friends in the same way. There may be certain friends you go to for support at certain times and other friends you go to at other times. And what I would hope, and I'm saying this in part as I didn't mention my role as chair of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee in the Division of Physical Sciences. Part of my goal and my hope would be that in every department, while you know we can never expect and shouldn't strive for uniformity of opinion and feeling about everything, there should be you know a plethora of support so students know where they can go, faculty know where they can go, so that they can form at least a critical mass of support to get through. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to change departmental policy tomorrow in light of what's happened in the news this morning. But I think it is important that we as a campus and as a division get to a place where we are willing to address and support students through a broad variety of issues. And that's not just students. Faculty need that support, staff need that support as well.
Okay, maybe I can add one thing. So yeah, I agree completely with everything that has been said so far. I think maybe to address the part of the question that says, how do you maybe talk to your colleagues who are in your department who may not be necessarily supportive? I think, and the literature is clear that sort of diversity and promotion of diversity is not just for the sake of quotas or mandates from government, that these policies actively improve the academic environment, actively improve the research environment. And so just to show them that diversity is important, because again, and I keep coming back to this, like we have big problems to solve and we haven't solved them yet, and we're not gonna solve them by all thinking along the same way. And so one way of potentially maybe solving some of these problems is to get other types of people in the arena and different types of opinions in the arena. And so there is a real academic point to be made for diversity. And I think we should not just present it as this is something that we're doing because some lawmaker has decided that that this would be good, but this is something that we're doing for the life of our campus, for the life of our country, for the life of our species.
If I may add a little bit, I agree with everything. Maybe I wanted to comment on faculty that don't want to be engaged on that aspect. I think some of them, which has been voiced before, choose to do that out of the fear of being labeled as this or that, and persecution or maybe lack of thereof. But what I wanted to say is that it's really important that we give everybody the voice and the chance to discuss and deliberate and go into the process. We will not solve the issue by wanting everybody to be homogeneous, of the same opinion. We're all different, we experience, we feel differently, but we need to engage with each other. We need to be able to discuss, because we know that scientific process and progress happens when we are confronted with the uncomfortable or unexpected or the new thing that we haven't seen. So I think that a same process will lead to long-term goals of being better society, achieving more and offering more as a university and students. Yeah.
If I may just say one more thing, I think that one possibly successful line of conversation might go the way of, everyone should in principle agree that removing barriers and making, giving access to everyone is a good thing, removing barriers. And from that on, you can just remind people that if you don't know what the barriers are, you cannot remove them. And the only way in which you can learn where the barriers are is if people who see those barriers tell you, and if you listen to them. So diversity is extremely important, because diversity is telling you where the barriers are. Otherwise, you cannot remove them. Otherwise, you cannot grant access. So that would be a way, I think, in which maybe one conversation can be held with respect to why we want diversity. Why is it so intrinsically important? But thank you all for everything that's been said.
Thank you, everybody. So our next question comes from something that I think our community really wants to discuss today with you about microaggressions. And if you could name a couple that you know of, maybe that you've experienced when you were a student, or maybe you experienced as a faculty member, but really what they want to know, our community wants to know, is how do you address these from a student to student perspective and an instructor to student perspective?
Well, I could start. I think it is important in every class, and I try in every class to lay down, my expectations, an explicit code of conduct, if you want, of what I expect of students in the classroom, what I expect of myself and of the teaching staff in what they, in how they handle interactions in the classroom, and those have to echo the being respectful for hearing people and listening to what people say if they feel that you have done something which has maybe inadvertently but has offended them. I think that there's an assumption often that in STEM classes that somehow they're objective and everyone can just get along, or the battlefield of intellectual combat is even and everyone can participate. And I think it's important to explicitly lay out what you believe is appropriate behavior or not, then at least you have a basis on which to then have a discussion. There's a whole range of ways that you can respond. It's very difficult to respond in the moment, and it takes a lot of practice. And I can certainly say I don't do it very well. I more often than not, I feel like I didn't do it well, and I have to go back and try to fix it afterwards. But there's the issue of what do you do in the moment? Do you pull someone aside? Is it an online post? What is it? So there are a wide variety of things you could do, but I think it's impossible to do that if you don't bring in at the beginning that you expect students to behave in a particular professional and respectful manner, and make it clear that you expect yourself to hold yourself to those standards, and you hold the teaching staff to that standard.
Could you repeat the question fully? It was kind of long. I think you asked us whether and give some examples of the microaggressions that we have experienced.
Yes. So
I think I publicly said that actually it was my advisor at a master program who told me that, I should just give up. I will never be there where the men are, ever. So question like, what was it? Why are you chasing this science? It's not going to run away from you. Or different, so that's at the student time. I think what students often experience, myself included, is in a group environment, not being asked for an opinion where the majority takes over the conversation, and those who feel the right to be heard. Whereas those that are marginalized often feel, should I speak? Do I have the right to speak? What is everybody going to think of if I speak? But I think it's important to stand up for certain, not all of them. It's really hard, as Sarkar said, to address all of them. And in the moment, they're all emotional. So your first response is going to be emotional. But with time, maybe even writing down what would be appropriate response is a good first strategy for anybody, for the students, to address. But of course, we will be faced with things we don't expect. I have a small child, or he's 8. But when he was a baby and I was assistant professor, juggling everything was extremely hard. He was sick often. My husband traveled a lot, or still is well, not now, but in general. And a colleague would tell me a few years after that, Yelena, I understand you really well now, in the hallway. And I thought, well, what did I do now? What happened? And he said, well, my elderly parent that I have to take care of is getting sick, and I have to often travel and take care of them and postpone classes, and certain things that, for example, a young mother needs to do in an academic environment. So these are all things that may happen, but I think thank you for asking these questions. I think the students need to hear that we have experienced them. And I think my ultimate, response is, over the years that I've learned, is I shouldn't be bothered by it. I don't care about it. They don't care. They haven't given it any thought either. So I should not let it impact negatively my life. Yeah. So that's kind of self-empowerment. I think that's really important for everybody.
If I may, I would say that there are different situations, and I'll give you an example where I encounter this fairly often in my life, and I just have to let it slide, which is people often ask me where I'm from. I obviously have an accent. I've lived in this country now for 25 years, which is considerably more, well, it's more than half my life. and I'm never going to ditch this accent. But the fact that I'm asked automatically where I'm from, and sometimes I just kind of try to wiggle out of it by saying, well, I live in San Diego, or before I came from Seattle. And of course, most of the time that's not enough, and you have to give the eventual answer that I'm Romanian. It depends on the context. Oftentimes people don't realize that they're asking a question that's a bit grating, and they're not very good at taking a hint either. Because obviously if I tell them things like, I moved here from Seattle, that means that I don't really want to talk about it. But they're curious, so they're going to continue asking. But if the intent is just because they like my accent, or because they're genuinely interested. I'm a white woman, probably kind of like an Eastern European accent. Where exactly am I from? It's okay. I let it slide. There have been instances when I was an undergraduate in dealing with, because I did my undergraduate studies here in the US as well, where there was more aggressiveness to the tone, and I wish I had reacted better then. I didn't. I was emotional, like Elena said. I eventually ended up going back to my room and crying, and that was not the right reaction. But I would advise, if I may give advice, my advice would be to have something more than just a polite, neutral answer in the cases when there's ill intent, because people need to know that they are not, that these things are not okay. So intent matters in such microaggressions, because ultimately, and again, this is my experience, which is fairly limited in terms of where exactly these have been. I'm sure that people of color encounter these in much more varied and unpleasant ways every day. So I'll just stop here.
Maybe I can add just a little bit more to this discussion, which is an excellent question, by the way. I think for me personally, my dealing with microaggression has ranged from the truly micro, which is something like, oh, you're so eloquent, which I'm not, for whatever, to more openly racist statements. And for me, I grew up in, I was the only child of my parents, and so it was always just the three of us, and so I kind of grew up just having a pretty decent knowledge of self. And so these things, from the micro to the macro aggressive things never really fazed me, and at the beginning I just let them go. It's like, yeah, okay, people saying stupid things. But then maybe I would say during my postdoc, I was going to let something like that go. Someone said something about a female colleague of ours, which is completely inappropriate. I was going to let it go. But then I decided to say something about it, because I realized that even though that I wasn't personally affected by it, that she was. And I think for each of us to sort of grow as human beings requires us to be each other's allies, and whether that's people of color, whether that's women, underrepresented, or majority people. It's just, we have to be each other's allies. We have to say something. So speaking to the students here as to how to deal with these, whenever you see them, even if they're not happening to you, you have to speak on these things, because it's not you today, but it could very well be you tomorrow. And moreover, it's just, the human thing to do. And so, in terms of professors dealing with microaggression, I haven't had too much experience with that. I think some of my female colleagues have told me horror stories of students being disrespectful to them because they thought, well, it's a female student, and it's a female professor, and I can get away with it, and trying to intimidate them and so forth. I haven't really encountered any of that for some reason, I don't know, but I would say that there was one case where a female professor told me that one of my students was inappropriate with her, and I had to have a very serious talk with him, and just to say that this sort of behavior is not acceptable, not only because it's sort of you're trying to bully a female professor, which seems that's a strange thing to me, but also because as a university, again, we are trying to develop a culture, at least build on a culture of supporting each other, and that if that student, and so I had to make it clear that if you are not capable or willing to buy into the culture, then we're going to have to go our separate ways. And so I think for professors, we have to be each other's allies. We have to have each other's backs. For students, you have to have each other's backs. You have to be each other's allies. You have to call these things out when they occur.
Thank you, everybody. So I will just mention that this past year, I facilitated or coordinated a talk on microaggressions with the Women's Center, and they did an excellent job. So if any of you are doing summer programs or team building in your office and you want to reach out to them, they actually have this incredible tool that has possible microaggressions and ways to respond to it, so that it's not emotional but factual, and that is empowering when you know that you are on the right side. So we have about 15 minutes left and about 2 to 3 more questions that I'd like to ask. And I might combine 2 questions right now. So the first question is, do you have any tips for improving the climate of the department to support diversity initiatives? And the second part is, like, how do you hold each other accountable in academia to create welcoming spaces? So it's kind of goes hand in hand, right? Improving the climate and creating a welcoming space.
All right, so I'll take the first piece of how to improve climate. So a lot of studies have been shown that shows the correlation between the way the person feels and what they're experiencing versus the way that the department behaves. If those two things don't correlate, if there's not a strong overlap, then that person's going to be unhappy. So as a department, we have to do a really good job as a university of setting ideals and letting everyone know where we stand as a university. As a department, we have to lay down the strategic goals that what we have for our EDI moving forward, for our recruitment, for the type of experiences that we want our students to have. We need to have this explicitly written on our web pages. We need to share this information so that everyone knows it's always beside us. I say that because one of the aspects of EDI is that we think that if we make a diversity statement and put it on a website, that's going to be strong enough to actually have an effect on a department or a community. It's not that. This is like everything else in life. If you want something to be good, you have to have a habit of actually implementing that. If you want to be a good baseball player, you have to practice. If you want to have good experiences with respect to EDI, you have to have practical aspects built inside your program in a strategic, purposeful way. Case in point, your website should have at the very beginning, you should have a whole entire section that talks about EDI and talks about the experiences that you expect your students to have. There's this whole aspect of civility that we don't actually discuss, where there's a direct overlap between climate and civility. And so we should have a whole community in which we discuss the civility within our department and the expectations we have for communications with each other. I don't know how many times I've been inside a faculty meeting where the civility has absolutely died. And it doesn't have to be that way. And there's no accountability for it. So if you can't have accountability for civility, how can you have accountability for sexism, for racism, for all the rest of these isms? So we need to build a foundation of communication in a way that everyone knows what the expectations are. And more importantly, we hold each other accountable for that in some form or fashion.
So I agree completely with what Dr. Stalling said. But changing culture, as I think we all understand, can be a difficult, long-term, time-consuming, energy-consuming, will-sapping endeavor. And so I did want to say a couple of things. One is we're here in the Division of Physical Sciences, and one of the things that we've asked each of the departments to do in the Division of Physical Sciences is to create the kind of strategic plan that Dr. Stallings was discussing. I expect that different departments are likely to be in very different places, but the goal was to get started and to use this as a document that can be iterated on. So that means for each of us as faculty, for each of us as staff, for each of us as graduate students, you can ask your department leadership if they haven't already told you how that equity, diversity, and inclusion strategic plan is being developed and what the plans are for it. You can ask how it's happening. There's a tendency, I think, in addition to simply diversity statement and putting on the website, which, by the way, our department, we haven't quite yet put it on the website, but we will. There's a tendency to create a committee. That's another thing that faculty do. They create a committee and the committee goes out and does something. But in the end, if that committee doesn't get enough faculty on board to actually change their behavior on the ground, that's not likely to succeed. So I don't have any magic bullets, but I think we have a process and a mechanism that people can get involved in this year.
So in my personal life, I realized that the more I advance, the more people that I have to look out for. I mean, in the sense of looking out for them to protect them from everything. For example, it would be harder for a junior faculty member to speak up if they encounter an issue, which means that someone like me who's gone through all the steps and is now full professor has to particularly look out for instances where they might have something to say and they don't get a chance to say it. So it feels like the more you advance in years, the more responsibility you have for the people who are younger. And I think that this is something that we should really try to instill in our faculty, that advancing means that you have more and more responsibility for the people that are coming after you. Because the truth of the matter is that as you advance, you feel like you have less and less time to do research because there are all of these things that are surrounding you, but they're part of your responsibility. And that's what happens. It's like when you grow up, you gain more responsibility when you advance in the academic hierarchy. You should have more responsibility for the people that come after you. So I think that this would be helpful if we manage to communicate that to the faculty in our department. If you're an associate professor, you can look out for the assistant professors. If you're a full professor, you should look out for everybody. So.
To add on to that, I think maybe an ideal setting would be where we view a department as a community, or a division as a community. I think community with a common goal of advancing science and humanity and advancing everything, right? So I think that's ideal goal that we should strive for. I'm not sure how to get there. An example of maybe specific action we could do, but it's not for faculty, but it could be for faculty. For example, groups that are intertwined between different schools. For example, I wish I'd met Todd, earlier, but I didn't because, I sit in physical science and I do this and I do that, but it could be some sort of, call them self-selected communities or freshman faculty, this or that. But I remember when I came, and especially when I had a child, I really felt lost because I didn't have that sense of belonging to certain community, to people who have had similar experiences, right? To help me out. And And on another note, to engage other faculty that are maybe not aware of all of this. So it's not ill intent or, it's just lack of the knowledge thereof. Having some sort of way of facilitating open and not judgmental conversation about issues, or not issues, goals, make them positive, let's not make them negative. I think is something, so of course it's good to have, as Dr. Stalin said, rules and policies, that's a must, right? Have some goals there, but how do we get to a perfect setting of having a community, something that we maybe want to talk, because not everybody maybe has the same opinion as me, that we should feel like a community. And I want to hear what they have to say, right? These kinds of things. So but improving climate means that everybody's included, right? And feel being heard, and yeah.
Yeah, I want to just, that's an excellent point, echo that again. I think improving the climate requires all of the stakeholders to buy in to a common vision. And all of the stakeholders in this case are the faculty, but also the students. And so if we want to improve the climate in a department, we're going to have to bring in the students as well, bring in the student leaders, make them a part of the conversation, and just be honest with ourselves in terms of where we are and where we want to be. And like everything else, it requires elbow grease, it requires hard work. And some departments are further along than others. But we're not going to get better unless we're just honest with where we are, and have clear directions as to where we want to go. And yeah.
I know that I already spoke a couple seconds ago about this, but there's one other aspect of this that I think that we don't do collectively as well as we should. We have an entire group of social scientists on our campus that do great research. And we have peer-reviewed research which absolutely speaks to practices and policies that we can utilize that are not just for STEM, that are for the whole entire campus, right? Or for every single organization. And we don't often use them as a resource the way that we should. So we do things like we'll have mandatory diversity training or something like that. When you talk to any social scientists, they'll say, well, for the last 10 years, we've known that mandatory diversity training actually has a deleterious effect on diversity within departments and organizations. So our first jump that we often take is something that we see is a low bar and see is something that we can do. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome is what we want it to be. So we have to approach this as scientists. In every other phase of our life, we act as scientists. Why do we not act as scientists in this particular phase? We need to keep that in mind.
Thank you, everybody, so much. So we are out of time. We unfortunately did not cover all of the questions that were asked by students and everybody in our community. But we weren't trying to solve the world's problems today. We were trying to start this dialogue, this conversation, and I really appreciate all of the faculty who joined us, and all of the students that came, all of the staff that are here, because it's important to see these faces and these names and to know who's on your team and who you can start these conversations with. So hopefully today you know that you have at least 54 other folks in UCSD in STEM that you can go to. And so again, thank you so much for your time, your energy, for sharing your experiences, for asking great questions. Today is the last of the Woke series presentations. So you can access, I put in the chat, past recordings, and we will be uploading next week this recording if you want to share it with anybody else. Thank you so much, and I'll leave it at that.
Great discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Stay healthy.